All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is In Liberty and Health, episode number 275. Getting back to foreign policy stuff, I've been a little bit away from it. Perhaps not as attentive to foreign policy stuff recently as much as I should be. But there's been a lot going on in Gaza, the Red Sea, and then obviously we want to talk about the military-industrial complex puppets and apologies, some of the happenings with the GOP and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you hit all the links below where you could find my guest, you could find myself, everything I got going on, the world's greatest supplements, Tiger Fitness right there, and the world's best electrolytes, LMNT, and Fox and Sons Coffee. Make sure you use code Kyle at checkout for all that stuff. And yeah, let's get right into it. What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovic. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
Dave DeCamp, welcome back, man.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. Well, you've kind of done a world tour since the last show, from Ron Paul to Tim Cast. I feel like I'm missing a few others there, probably Russell Brand as well. How's everything going for you?
Things are good. I mean, things aren't good for the world, so that usually means I'm busy. But my personal life is great. My kids are doing good. Wife's good. We live out here in paradise in the country, so I can't complain. But there's just been, when it comes to these escalations in the Middle East and everything, I mean, it's just really unbelievable what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really doesn't seem like there's a lot of an appetite for a ceasefire amongst the elected officials. Um, Apologies. One thing that kind of gave me a little bit of hope was when the whole Israel-Gaza war first broke out. I remember some of my coworkers saying, Joe Biden has been over to the border of Israel, but he's never been to the border of the United States. I'm like, well, it's not quite, we shouldn't be doing any of this, but it's a better talking point that we should bomb them into the Stone Age. So I guess you got to take progress where you can get it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, from my experience, like, of course, anybody, all the Republicans in Congress, except with the one exception, really, of Thomas Massey,
Right.
expected them to be all horrible on this. But I have noticed people like my friends and stuff that I know that are like kind of MAGA people
Yeah.
have actually, have a different attitude about this than I thought. And I think
Mhm.
it's because of Ukraine. I think that was very illuminating for them, all this foreign aid and stuff that the US was sinking into that. So it's like, okay, then why are we supporting this one?
Mhm.
And especially people are, in their 20s and 30s, they're not as kind of brainwashed to love Israel as much as older people. So,
Mhm.
but it has been pretty disheartening overall, just because
Mhm.
it did kind of feel like there was some progress going on with Republicans when it came to Ukraine, but all
Yeah.
of them are totally in the tank for Israel.
Yeah, it really seems like specifically Marjorie Taylor Greene, ever since the Chinese spy balloon kind of popped, she's gone completely off the rails. Like I can't even say I've paid attention to her at all, but I know that she's even made videos saying like, oh, we shouldn't cut military spending at all. And obviously, I'm pretty sure she's all in on Israel. And then even like the Matt Gaetz was kind of a heartbreaker, because I know you and I have both gone out of our way to praise him for his honest, heroic work in some of his bills that he's put forth. To see him, you can almost see him have this cognitive dissonance when he speaks about giving aid to Israel. I remember when he was saying, well, we shouldn't condition aid on the people's goodwill for Israel. And like right when he said that, it looked like there's a little bit of smoke coming out of his ears. But then he finished the sentence and said, oh, we shouldn't condition the goodwill of the people on aid to Israel on assisting Ukraine. So it's like you said, it's a sad trajectory.
Yeah, Gates has been disappointing to see. I mean, I kind of figured that he
Right.
was going to be bad on this, but he was really good for a while. He was introducing all these bills to pull out of Syria, pull out of Somalia, and basically since this has all popped off, and now the U.S. is entering another war in the Middle East, involved in another huge war, and it looks like it's going to spiral even further. I mean, he's been silent on it essentially. He criticized a little bit the airstrikes in Yemen, but he hasn't spoken out against any of the things that led to that. I mean, and you have all these troops in Iraq and Syria under like constant rocket attack, and this is the time to introduce the bill to leave Syria, to leave Iraq. I believe Rand Paul did that. He's been pretty good, Rand Paul. I've heard him say some questionable things, but he voted for the thing. So Bernie Sanders put in a bill to the Senate, and they voted on it yesterday. And basically, it required the State Department to submit a report on whether or not Israel's committing human rights violations in Gaza within 30 days. And if they didn't submit that report, then aid to Israel would have to be frozen. And only 11 senators voted for it, but Rand Paul did. He was the only Republican, because it would have frozen aid if they did find human rights violations, which I'm sure there's no shortage of that.
It wouldn't take a lot of digging to find that one. Kind of to the point of Rand Paul, I really liked his rebuke of Nikki Haley. I know we were all kind of talking, saying, "Oh, he's probably just going to come out and endorse DeSantis," but the whole "Never Nikki" thing was definitely interesting. He's kind of been questionable in the past, because I know he supported the Iron Dome for Israel. And I'm pretty sure he's even came out and like spoke about it on the floor and said like, "Hey, no, I support an Iron Dome for Israel." So kind of seeing him flip flop on this specific issue, at least this time the flop is good.
Yeah, I remember earlier on in this thing, he was talking. I was on some news show about the aid to Israel, and he said like the 14 billion that they're the additional aid that they're going to give them, and he kind of said that he supported it, but he said he didn't want to be part of this big thing. Because Biden asked for like 113 billion for all these different wars. So that was his, that's what he was against. But he said that, the U.S. should still give the aid to Israel, which is pretty disappointing. But, it's Rand Paul.
Yeah, you got to kind of be used to disappointment. So I guess let's kind of dive into a little bit more with Gaza here. The latest death toll, to my understanding, is like 24,000. I was listening to Judge Knapp with our friend Kyle Anzalone, and he did absolutely fantastic on there. I didn't get a chance to message him and let him know that like he's doing an excellent job on there, and I see the show's getting a lot of traction, so that's really, really good for him. But if I remember correctly, 24,000, I'm guessing, and you can correct me here and obviously let me know what else is going on. 24,000 dead, and then probably 8 to 10,000 buried under the rubble as an estimate.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably about right. I know the 24,000 dead is the number coming from the Gaza Health Ministry, and that doesn't take into account the people that are missing. I haven't seen a number on that. I remember a few weeks ago they said 7,000 people were missing and presumed to be under the rubble. So it probably is somewhere around there. And then for people who aren't aware, the death toll was initially like kind of questioned by Biden. He said that he didn't believe the numbers coming from Gaza's health ministry. And then after that, there was kind of all this like the UN and all these aid groups that operate in Gaza basically said, these are known as reliable numbers. If you look back at the previous Gaza wars, their numbers were always accurate. They even aligned with Israeli estimates. And then the State Department actually said, "Oh yeah, we actually think the number's probably higher. Realistically, it's probably much higher." So Israeli officials have said to the media that the numbers are probably accurate, because a lot of people who don't really pay attention say, "Oh, where'd you get that number from?" "Oh, it's from Hamas."
From Hamas.
Yeah, they just aren't aware that there is a track record here. And if you look at the destruction in Gaza, this is not an unfathomable number. I mean, they've destroyed the place. I mean, this is the heaviest, basically modern. I shouldn't say modern, because you could look back at World War II and Korea. Those are still, I guess, kind of considered modern war, because that's when air power really became such a big part of it. But in recent years, like this century, this is definitely the heaviest bombing campaign of this century.
Yeah, I did a debate, and I know that you kind of made the mistake of doing the same thing. I definitely don't think I'm cut out for it. I think you probably did better than me, but where my opponent had said that, "Oh, well, there's a Hamas numbers and I don't trust them." Like, okay, but like the State Department and Israel both are saying that, like, yeah, these numbers are accurate. So you don't believe them because they're coming from Hamas, but you believe the Israeli government is doing the right thing and you morally support them, but you don't believe that they're right on this. Like there's a whole just space here that I don't quite fully understand.
Yeah, it's kind of just something easy for people to do. That's what Biden did. They're like,
Right.
at that time it was about 10,000, and he's like, "What do you think? 10,000 Palestinians killed. A few thousand are children." And so the reaction is, "Oh, well, we can't trust those numbers." But
Mhm.
that's just the deflection. And maybe they're a little inaccurate, but it's the best sense. I don't think. I think if, like I said, they're probably a low estimate, but you
Mhm.
got to have some sense of the casualties. Although Ukraine is a very strange situation because neither side has been putting out their casualties. So, like,
Mhm.
you could have a rough estimate, but really nothing. Nothing's really narrowed down there, which is very strange. It's like just a weird propaganda thing.
Right. So, what do you think the chances are of this spreading to a wider war? I know a lot of people have talked about this. My read of the situation is I don't think it's too likely unless Israel really starts to get carried away and starts doing a lot more bombing in Lebanon and a lot more bombing in Syria and, targeting Iran specifically. Um, but you would be much more well read on that to me. So, what do you think the chances are of Israel kind of going a little bit more postal than they already have gone?
I mean, it seems like they're still ramping things up. So this was something that I missed yesterday that we just had Jason Ditz, who's another writer for Antiwar.com. He just wrote that up.
Mhm.
That yesterday Israel launched these like huge strikes in Lebanon. They said it was like
Oh.
the heaviest yet. And
Mhm.
one Israeli military, I forget, he was a commander or some kind of officer, said that Israeli special operations went into Lebanon. So there's some sort of ground operation too. So that's a pretty huge escalation. That's not really confirmed, but that's kind of what it sounded like he was saying.
Well, Israel depends on a lot of air superiority. Like they don't do a lot of on the ground operations,
Yeah.
specifically in Lebanon. Wasn't it when they went in there in 2006, they kind of got their asses handed to them on their last ground operation there?
Yeah. Yeah. They had a tough
Mhm.
time. And they had a tough time in Gaza in 2014. And they're having a tough time now. It seems like I know that they just like pulled some troops out of North Gaza saying, oh, we took out their leader, Hamas leadership. And now there's all these
Yeah.
rocket attacks coming from North Gaza. So they didn't it's really that's another thing that's hard to know is like the number of Hamas guys that have been killed and the number of
Sure.
Israeli soldiers. They say like almost 200 Israeli soldiers have been killed in the ground fighting, but
Mhm.
then there's these reports in Israeli media that say like 5,000 Israeli troops have been
Oh
disabled,
wow. Yeah.
not killed, disabled. But like if that's the ratio, like if 5,000 are disabled, then like just that's more have to be getting killed. But I don't know. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I think the risk is really high. I mean, it kind of already has because the US is bombing Yemen now. They've
Mhm.
bombed Yemen 3 times since last Friday, and the Houthis, because the Houthis started attacking shipping in the Red Sea in protest
Mhm.
of what's happening in
I'm
Gaza.
glad you're getting this.
Yeah, so at first they said they were targeting Israeli linked shipping. And for the most
Mhm.
part, it seemed like in some cases they targeted ships that weren't linked to Israel, but that's what they were targeting for the most part. So the US and the UK bombed Yemen this past Friday, targeted the Houthis, and then the Houthis just started doing more attacks, and they said, now we're going to attack American and British shipping interests. And just today, for a second time, the Houthis hit an American owned cargo ship. So it's just a mess. Like after those airstrikes, the idea was to protect shipping in the region. All these companies are suspending shipping. The whole situation is much more volatile now. And the US has bombed them again twice more since then. And it's just insane. And like, this is all just to protect Israel, just so Israel can keep doing what it's doing in Gaza because the Houthis keep saying if that stops, we'll stop. But Biden doesn't want to cut Netanyahu off. Instead, he's
Mhm.
just wants war, I guess. And it's uh it's just really crazy because the Houthis, if you know anything about them, they just faced this ruthless bombing campaign from 2015 to 2022. The US backed this
Mhm.
Saudi and UAE coalition against the Houthis, and it was just a brutal bombing campaign with a blockade. And the Houthis just got stronger and became more of like a efficient fighting force and got missile and drone capabilities that they didn't have before. So if they think they could just launch some limited airstrikes in Yemen and that would stop the Houthis, I mean, it's just not. I don't know. I mean, sometimes you just think they're stupid or incompetent, or if they're just doing this purposely, if they just want escalation. But it's just crazy.
Well, it seems like the MO of the Biden administration is essentially no talks, no diplomacy, escalation at all times, and this doesn't seem to be any different. People had kind of been saying that, like, okay, well, now we're going to war with Yemen, but my understanding is that essentially there was a ceasefire that started in January of 2022 in Yemen with the Saudis, correct?
Yeah, it started in April 2022.
Okay, and then we've been pretty much consistently either arming the Saudis or directly bombing Yemen since 2015 when Obama said we would placate the Saudis, right?
Yeah, so the U.S., there was a drone war in Yemen against Al Qaeda that was pretty bad. A lot of civilians killed in that, and then actually the Houthis. So the area of Yemen that they control is what used to be North Yemen. Yemen used to be North and South Yemen before they became one country in 1990. And it's important. This is an important point because in the Western media they always call them the Houthi rebels, but they actually they've controlled the capital Sana'a and the area of Yemen where most people live. It's like 80% of the population live in the area that they control, and this has been like this for 10 years now. So they're not just rebels, they're a government in this area. So they were actually a partner of the U.S. in 2015 against Al Qaeda. The U.S. started sharing intelligence with them against Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. A few months after that, the Saudis and the UAE and some other Gulf countries intervened in Yemen. They wanted to reinstate the government that the Houthis drove out, kicked out of Sana'a. That was based in Saudi Arabia at the time. They're still based in Saudi Arabia because they didn't make any progress in that goal after 7 years of full blown war. So then they reached that ceasefire. And one of the reasons why they agreed to a ceasefire, the Saudis sued for peace, was because the Houthis started hitting their oil fields and they were getting really good at that. And, they can't have that.
Right.
So what's really crazy is that because Yemen was a big issue for me. It was one of the things that got me writing because it was so horrific. Right. They bombed food supplies, water treatment plants, sewage facilities, like just civilian infrastructure, and caused starvation and disease. And it always sticks with me that they bombed fishing boats and they bombed farms and like livestock and sheep and stuff. So it's like on par with what Israel's doing in Gaza. But anyway, so since April 2022, they've had the ceasefire. There's been some fighting on the ground, but the Saudis and the Houthis there's been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen and no Houthi attacks in Saudi Arabia. And what's really incredible is that after Biden bombed Yemen, the Saudis said, urged the U.S. to show restraint in Yemen, because for years it was the Saudis basically, because the U.S. there was a lot of pressure from within in the U.S. There was a war powers resolution passed in 2018, I think. Was it 2018? To end U.S., or maybe it was 2019, to end U.S. support for this horrific war, and Trump vetoed that. Right. So there was a lot of pressure. And that actually, just the fact that Congress passed that, the UAE pulled its ground forces out of Yemen. They were like, oh, we're losing Congress. We got to get out of here. And so there was just pressure and stuff. And now, and it was the Saudis who were like, come on, give us more weapons, help us keep bombing Yemen. And now they're the ones calling for restraint. It's really just amazing to me. Not amazing in a good way, but it's just shows how insane Biden is.
Do you think that the Saudis are calling for a ceasefire because the Houthi rebels were getting good at blowing up the oil fields? Like they realized, hey, if you keep doing this, then this could start putting pressure on us. So hey, let's kind of cool this shit off.
Yeah, definitely. They don't want that to start happening again. And the Saudis have, it seems like, just taken kind of a new approach to things. They opened up with Iran last year.
Right.
In Syria, they reopened up diplomatic ties with Syria. It seems like they're just focusing on diplomacy and economic cooperation. So it's just kind of a different they're trying a new way out, not trying to
Mhm.
bomb their problems away.
Right. Now, do you think China's a little bit of a player in this? Because I know that China was kind of over there, and as much people were probably going to say like, "Oh, this is China trying to take over the world." Um, if you look at the U.S. and what they're doing and what China's trying to do, um, I hate to say it, but China's the good guys here. When you look at the two, China has been consistently pushing for peace between the Palestinians and Israel. They were trying to work out deals with the Saudis and Yemenis. They were trying to work with peace over in Ukraine. And I think a lot of this is probably because, like, hey, we want the oil, and then also they get a lot of grain from Ukraine. So, where do you think China plays a role in any of this, or do you think they're just kind of like there and encouraging this, but not playing like any kind of active role?
I think they're kind of just sitting back because, if you're
Mhm.
China and, you had the US so focused on building up in Asia, kind of preparing for
Mhm.
this war with China in the future.
Mhm.
And that's still happening. But with the
Yeah.
US so like getting so sucked into this thing, I think China is kind of, just that not maybe happy to see that, just that the US is getting
Mhm.
bogged down there, still bogged down in Ukraine in a way. And their position has been neutral when it comes to Israel and Palestine. They have economic ties with Israel that the US isn't happy about and wants Israel to end. And they also, they were the ones that brokered the Saudi Iran deal, and
Mhm.
this is part of their kind of diplomatic clout that the U.S. is the war maker in the Middle East and they're the peacemaker, and that's how
Right.
that's the role they're gonna try to play. They were just saying the other day that there should be a Gaza, an international peace conference to try to figure out how to put an end to this thing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's and China does have their one overseas military base is in Djibouti on the Red Sea, so they
Mm.
but they haven't gotten involved in this. And I know Chinese ships have gone through the area, no problem.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Oh,
that's what
good.
neutrality can get for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing because, like, you would think that our founding fathers had the United States as a shining city on the hill, but now we've become the global empire, and essentially China gets to be the city, the shining city on a hill, which is really really sad because for all the talk we hear of the Communist Party of China being this awful machine, they're doing a lot to boost their own credibility all over the world rather than kind of drive theirs down like the U.S. has done a lot by essentially ensuring destruction by arming all these countries that are going to war rather than encouraging peace talks. Now, when it comes to the Red Sea, I've heard some people say, I think I sent it over in our little group chat about it was Donald Trump Jr. on Timcast saying that a lot of the trade all over the world would be essentially it would grind to a halt if the Red Sea really got plugged up. Is there truth to that? Do you think they're overstating it, or do you think that's accurate?
Well, it wouldn't grind to a halt. I mean, it would just be more expensive because then they have to go around the Cape of Good Hope in South
Mhm.
Africa,
Sure.
and a lot of ships have already been doing that. But it is a big deal. I mean, the Suez
Mhm.
Canal is a huge strategic shipping lane. It's definitely a big deal if like the whole you know thing was closed and no ships could
Sure.
go in. We would really feel that.
Mhm.
So that's why, I mean, that's what the Houthis are using their power that they have there. And it's
Mhm.
interesting because it's not piracy. It's not like and in one case, they did hijack a ship. But it's one thing to stop pirates who are like trying to board ships because you could have
Sure.
security on the boat.
Right.
But it's another thing when they're just firing missiles and drones. Like
Mhm.
that's kind of a tough thing for just a regular commercial ship to defend from. And even if you have all these Navy ships, they're not going to be able to down every missile or drone.
Mhm.
So it's definitely a tricky thing. The
Right.
solution would be to end cut off the Israelis and, you know, talk to the Houthis. But no, of course,
Mhm.
we're not going to do that. And now that's another thing because I've seen some people say, some libertarians say, like, oh, isn't that the whole, isn't that at least one good reason to have a big military, to have a world global navy is to protect shipping lanes and to, you know, attack pirates. And, what about Jefferson went after the Barbary pirates? That's a big one. That's what DeSantis said that
Yeah.
gave the Barbary Wars gave Biden the
Mhm.
authorization to bomb the Houthis. But that
Mhm.
just misses the whole context that this is just a creation of all this the US intervention in the region everything that's happening right now, from what's happening in Gaza to what's happening in Yemen. I mean, and the U.S. has helped enforce a blockade, a naval, an air, land, and sea blockade on Yemen since 2015, and it's been eased, I think, to a pretty good extent since that ceasefire. But it hasn't been fully lifted. There's still only limited flights out of their airport, and they still screen ships going into Hodeidah, which is the port on the Red Sea. And now I think it's like tightening up again. So this idea that it's just like, oh, we're just protecting the world's shipping lanes when the U.S. has just created this mess. So, and again, they're targeting Israeli shipping. So say the U.S. was truly neutral and this was happening anyway, just work out a deal with the Houthis. I don't know.
Right.
Like, again, it's like bombing them. And if you know anything about them, it's just going to exacerbate the situation. It's not going to put a stop to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of seems to be a consistent theme with U.S. foreign policy, and I'm sure you know where I'm going, but blowback, essentially, where you just encourage the worst elements of these areas of the world by continuously, essentially harming their civilian population, and then the most radical elements of these governments rise up. I mean, you see this with Hamas, and then not to mention, Israel's support of Hamas, specifically Bibi Netanyahu, and then also, with the Houthis. I can't imagine a world where we weren't bombing them and, maybe traded with them and raised their standard of living, that they would be attacking ships that be going through the Red Sea. Because, once again, if we treated these countries the way that we should treat them, then like I said, I couldn't imagine a world where things wouldn't be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to imagine a world where the U.S. isn't involved in all these countries and all these conflicts. But yeah, I mean, you have to look at this just in that context. Again, the blockade on Yemen, and just in general, I mean, the U.S. uses economic sanctions on countries when they don't like their government. They put on economic embargoes on all sorts of countries, on Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, of course, that's still under the U.S. Economic embargo, and North Korea. I mean, there's a lot of countries like that, and besides that, just the sanctions. Like with Russia right now, they're thinking about just taking Russia's money, central bank reserves, and giving them to Ukraine. It's like, how is that? If you're going to look at the world from a libertarian perspective, how is any of this libertarian? So it's not like it's the U.S. is some great libertarian utopia that's just protecting the world's waters from pirates. Like, that's just not the situation.
Yeah, and it's silly to think so as well. So let's get on to the world's leading sponsor of terror, Iran. I've heard some people, I've heard some people say that if Iran were to get attacked and get, kind of brought into this whole war, then that would mean Russia would come in. Now, I'll give you my read, and then obviously you're much more educated on this than me. I really don't think that's the case. I think Russia probably has their hands, I don't want to say completely tied with Ukraine, but they probably don't want to be extended any further than absolutely necessary. And I definitely think Iran isn't as close to Russia as people might want to think. So they probably wouldn't want to intervene for Iran. And also the idea that like Iran is somehow sponsoring every single terrorist organization. I mean, you hear this from every single neocon and every single talking head, that it's always Iran's fault, right? Iran has, they're sending people over across the border. They're sponsoring Hamas. They're, sponsoring the Houthis. They're essentially at the goal or at the heart of all this terrorism. So what's your read on that situation between a wider war and Iran sponsoring all these terrorists?
Yeah, so when it comes to the wider war, I mean, Iran and Russia have definitely increased their kind of relationship. But yeah, I can't see Russia intervening directly on behalf of Iran. Like you said, I think they have too much going on in Ukraine, and just in general, like, I mean, Russia is in Syria. Russia's ally is allied with Syria, which is allied with Iran. But Russia, Israel, before October 7th, Israel bombed Syria like at a pretty good rate. Israel is bombing Syria all the time.
They disabled the Aleppo airport last year, didn't they?
Yeah, they did that several times now.
Yeah.
And Russia doesn't do anything about that. So I think they have an arrangement with Israel to not go in certain areas. But if that's a country
Mhm.
where they have a military presence and is one of their allies, I can't picture them intervening on behalf of Iran against Israel and the U.S., because
Sure.
the U.S. would definitely be involved there.
Mhm.
So a lot of people think that this could turn into World War III, the situation in the Middle East, but I don't really think that, even if it does really escalate. Again, I think kind of the interest of Russia and China is to kind of just sit back and let the US
Yeah.
deal with this mess.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would benefit both of them in a way. I mean, it would, globally it would be bad for the economy and stuff, but
Mhm.
it would benefit them more to stay out of it, I think, than to
Mhm.
intervene. And then when it comes to what Iran's up to in the region, I mean, so this is another thing. It's kind of a myth about the Houthis that they're an Iranian proxy.
Mhm.
They're a very independent group. Iran supports them politically, openly, but uh, they didn't just spring up out of nowhere. The Houthis,
Sure.
I've seen people say that they wouldn't exist without Iran, which is complete nonsense. So
Mhm.
they're a specific type of Shia Muslim. They're Zaidi Shias, and it's a different sect of Shia than the Shia that the Ayatollahs in Iran are, the 12er Shia. So the Zaidi Shias in the area of North Yemen, they've always been there. It used to be an imamate, which is an Islamic rule of Zaidi Shia imams for a
Mhm.
1,000 years in that area of Yemen until the 1960s. So that's the history there. And again, this is a Zaidi Shia group, so they're a homegrown movement. They started, I believe, in the 90s. They were called the Believing Youth, and it was kind of a pushback against the Salafi Sunni Islam that was spreading
Mhm.
and the Saudi influence. And so that's where they came from. And there was wars. They fought the government in Sana'a, the U.S. backed government, a few times from 2009, and a few years after that. There was the Arab Spring in Yemen, and that threw out the president Salah, who actually turned around and allied with the Houthis against the next president, who was Hadi, who that's who the Houthis threw out. But anyway, so that's their history. They're Yemeni. They have a deep history in the country, and they, at the time in those wars in 2009, there's WikiLeaks cables that say this, that the US doesn't think Iran is arming them, and officials have said that since. Now when it came to this war with the Saudis, it looks like they get some other kind of support from Iran. It's not clear exactly what. Iran always denies that they arm them, but the Houthis did develop this really good missile and drone capability that's very similar to Iran's missiles and drones, but kind of they're like a little different. So the theory is that Iran helped them, with blueprints and advise their engineers and stuff to build these weapons. And I think that's pretty plausible. And I'm sure, that Iran still denies that they arm them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do. And the US acts like that's the end of the world. If you arm a group, that's it. You're controlling them. But that means the US is controlling Israel, Saudi, all these countries in the region. It's kind of the
Mhm.
way that they look at that is kind of crazy. But even the Houthis say we don't get armed by Iran.
Mhm.
They say it's all homemade, made domestically, the missiles and drones.
Mhm.
So, but when it comes to Iran, they definitely have their allies in the region, the Shia militias in
Sure.
Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah, definitely an
Mhm.
Iranian ally. But they do operate independently. Iran has been encouraging some of the things that they do, but Iran's not like pulling all the strings here. They're definitely
Yeah.
involved in some way, but it's just not as uh, black and white as they try to portray it.
Yeah, that's kind of always been my read of the situation. I know that the neocons have been kind of targeting and eyeing Iran for years and years and years and years. And you hear about DeSantis saying on stage during all the debates, the days of placating Iran are over. And then I'm pretty sure even Trump in his victory speech was saying, "Oh, you wouldn't see this if I were president. Iran was captured and handled." But as we know under Biden, he's definitely been no dove when it comes to Iran. So, what's kind of been going on with the Iran deal and some of that, and like their nuclear, I don't want to say proliferation, but basically like their the idea that Iran is building a nuke.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of returning to the Iran deal, I mean, that's totally, off the table now.
Right.
Um, and there's always kind of the fear mongering about Iran's nuclear program. but there hasn't really been much new there. Iran is enriching uranium at a 60% level. They need 90% to make a bomb. 60% is the highest they ever did, and they actually did that. They took that step in response to, when Israel bombed one of their nuclear plants in one of their nuclear facilities inside Iran, because Israel has, does a lot of covert attacks inside Iran.
And Israel normally doesn't take credit for those attacks, correct?
Yeah, not officially, but there's leaks to the media, and then they like very strongly hint at it. So it's very clear when it is Israel. Oh, but one thing, Iran did just launch some airstrikes kind of across the region. They bombed Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan within 2 days. And so the strikes in Iraq, they said, targeted ISIS. ISIS took credit for a recent bombing in Iran that killed about 100 people. It was pretty big.
Wow.
So in Syria, they probably did that in cooperation with Syria. In Iraq, they hit Erbil, which is in the northern Kurdistan region. They said that they hit a Mossad base, like a secret Israeli intelligence base. In response, they didn't say what it was in response for, but Israel did just recently kill an Iranian IRGC officer in Syria, kind of their head guy in Syria. The local government in Kurdistan says that it wasn't a Mossad base. They say civilians were killed. But a few years ago, Iran launched strikes in the same area in 2022, and U.S. officials actually told the New York Times that they did hit like a Mossad, a facility that was used for training and intelligence ops. So there is an Israeli intel presence in that part of Iraq, but it's not clear if that's what Iran hit. But that's the reason, that's their thinking behind the strike, at least. It's not just like out of nowhere they bombed northern Iraq, although it does suck for Iraq because they just got bombed by the U.S. Like, they get bombed when nobody wants to bomb each other directly. Like, everybody just bombs Iraq. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's sad. So one thing that I wanted to ask about that just kind of slipped my mind a little bit earlier when you were talking. If, let's say, something were to happen in the Red Sea, you had mentioned kind of going over, what is it, like Northern Africa. Would anything going on in Somalia potentially have an issue with shipping worldwide if something were to happen in the Red Sea?
You mean like in Somalia, in what regard?
So, like, if the Red Sea, let's say, got shut down, right? Because
Yeah.
there's lots of ships getting bombed there. You were mentioning kind of going through the other end, which would be near Somalia, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that because of some of the foreign policy actions that have been happening in Somalia, specifically when Biden escalated like a year ago, do you think that could have any potential consequences?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of slowed down there because the government that the U.S. backs in Somalia, they launched like this big offensive against Al-Shabaab, and it seems like they've scaled that back. There hasn't been as many U.S. Airstrikes and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure it could have some sort of impact. The situation in Somalia for just regular people that live there has been pretty bad. So I'm sure shutting down shipping would make that much worse for just like the civilians that live there. And I know, Somali piracy could come back in a big way. I mean, I guess if the shipping is shut down, they would have nothing to hijack. But there actually was, because it's been a while since there was a Somali pirates tried to hijack a ship, but apparently the U.S. got involved in some encounter with pirates that they said were coming from Somalia. That is a thing. All this destabilization, creates things like that as well.
Yeah, I got you. So one thing that I'm sure you probably had read up on a little bit and would like to talk about would be the elections in Taiwan. So there's three parties, and I always forget one. There's the TPP, the Kuomintang, and then there's one other party. I can't remember
the
it.
DPP.
The DPP, that's right.
Yeah.
So what exactly happened on Taiwan? Because that was just 3 or 5 days ago, if I remember correctly. Let everybody know kind of what's going on over there and what you think that might mean for the U.S. with U.S.-China relations.
Yeah, so this is something I really wanted to really follow closely, but with everything that's been going on, it's been hard for me to follow it too closely. But what happened was it was their presidential election, and the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, they're the ruling party. They've been in power for the past 8 years, and they're all about kind of strengthening ties with the U.S. and the West. They're independence minded. It's very confusing and complicated, but Taiwan has never formally declared independence from China. And if that happens, it's long been, believed that means war with China if they formally declare independence, because the Kuomintang. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. I'll just mention the election and then I'll give like a little background. So you have the DPP, the ruling party, and their vice president ran as the candidate, William Lai. So he won, but they lost the legislature. The Kuomintang won the legislature. So, but it is still going to be about kind of the same, more of the same. And what has been happening in recent years with the U.S. giving Taiwan more military support, more diplomatic support, things that really, really anger China. It's like just the most sensitive situation for them. So it wasn't kind of a big deal, this election, because the Kuomintang. So what's interesting about the Kuomintang is that they're the party of Chiang Kai-shek, who lost the civil war in China against Mao, and he fled to Taiwan. And, those were the Chinese nationalists, the Kuomintang. And, he wasn't supposed to, his plan wasn't to set up a country in Taiwan. His plan was to regroup. Hopefully the US is going to give him more support and then go try to, attack Mao again. But that never really happened. But they've always considered themselves China, the Republic of China from Taiwan. So it's just, again, it's confusing. So they consider themselves China. China, Beijing, the communists, they consider themselves China. And there's like kind of this one China understanding that there is one China, but Taiwan thinks they're China, and then the mainland thinks they're China. So that's why they haven't declared independence. It's not that they don't act as an independent country in Taiwan. It's just that they're China. So it's very strange. But the DPP wants independence. They say that they're already a de facto independent country. So I don't expect them to declare independence anytime soon, just again because they know that probably means war, but they're gonna continue to move closer to the US. And if the China hawks in the US still have their way, which I think they will, even with everything else going on, they're going to keep increasing ties with Taiwan. So the Kuomintang came in second. They took over the legislature, and then the TPP, the Taiwan's People's Party, they're relatively new. They started in 2019. They came in third, but they had a pretty good turnout. It was the first time really in Taiwan's elections that there was like a viable third party. And they also were considered like more moderate, and they probably would have worked to ease tensions with China. Both the Kuomintang and the TPP probably would have, the Kuomintang definitely, but would have like tried to start talking to China again and really cool things down.
Yeah, so weren't the Kuomintang and the TPP, the newer party, weren't they supposed to kind of come together to try to beat the DPP? I'm guessing that never happened, or like kind of never shook out.
Yeah. So they agreed at one point to make a coalition, and they probably would have won if they did that, but they couldn't agree who was going to be the president, who was going to be vice president, I think. And then I know that some people in Taiwan accused the U.S. of election interference because U.S. officials started poking around and saying, "Hey, who told you guys to make a coalition? Where'd you get that idea?" Kind of insinuating that it was China's idea. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so that would have been, for our purposes, us non-interventionists, it would have probably been better if Kuomintang won, or if they made that coalition and won. So yeah, it's just not good. And actually the situation with China right now that seems most volatile is in the South China Sea with the Philippines. They've been really going crazy over there.
Well, yeah, haven't there been some I know that there's always warships sailing through the Taiwan Strait and then obviously through the Philippines as well. I think you had some stories that you told recently, but I haven't been paying quite enough attention to antiwar.com and everything like that as much as I should be. But what's kind of been going on with the Philippines? Because I know it was last year that Kamala Harris was over there and said, "We will defend you in the situation of, if there's any issues with this little contested reef."
Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing here. So The Philippines got a new president in 2022, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. His father was like a dictator of the Philippines for a long time. But he came in kind of vowing to take a harder line against China in the South China Sea because China has these claims and they extend to these islands and reefs that the Philippines claim, and they have this dispute. But Duterte, who was the last president, he tried to maintain pretty good ties with China. He threatened to kick the U.S. out at one point. But Marcos came in basically and reversed that and is moving much closer to the U.S. He signed a deal with the U.S., so there's more U.S. military bases are going to be in the country. They're doing joint, naval patrols and stuff in the South China Sea. So the U.S. is really backing him. And the U.S., they've said this for a long time, that the U.S. and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty, and the U.S. says that applies to attacks on Philippine ships in the South China Sea. So that means if the Philippines and China ever get into some sort of naval battle, or even just, who knows what it could be, the U.S. is saying they're going to intervene to fight China directly. It's insane. So this has all emboldened Marcos to really push back against China's claims. And there's been, in the past year, just like a lot of these encounters between Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels or fishing boats. And there's been some collisions and like in some cases, China fired water cannons. And it's just like a really volatile situation. And for some reason, we're promising war over it, which is it just doesn't make much sense to me. But it is something, Marcos is very determined. They keep saying they're going to try to militarize these islands now and build everything up. And yeah, it's just kind of escalating over there.
Okay, so to pivot back to Taiwan for a second, do you think the legislature going over to the Kuomintang, do you think that's going to be more, I don't know if this is going to be a good comparison, but basically kind of like what we have right now in the U.S., where you have like a Republican-controlled House with a Democrat president? Or do you think it's a little bit more nuanced than that? Because what we see right now is a little bit more of like stalemate, where like the Republicans have a lot of balls, so they're kind of making sure that a lot of the stuff that Biden wants to do doesn't always get passed. Do you think it's a situation like that? Or like I said, do you think it's a little bit more nuanced?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, I don't know enough about kind of the internal politics to know much, how that's going to go. But I think when it comes to the DPP, what they want to do with the U.S., I mean, I don't think there's really much that they need in terms of like passing new laws. They're just looking for the U.S. basically to give them things and recognize them in different areas. So and military training, like I don't think they're going to need to pass new legislation for that. So it might not really affect that too much, unless there's like real radical things that they want to do.
So I'm going to give you a pretty broad question now, because I know you don't get to talk much about the presidential candidates. What do you make of the comments that none of this would be happening under Trump?
I mean, it's just impossible to know. And like everybody points to the Abraham Accords that he signed in the Middle East, but those kind of led to this attack, that Hamas attack on October 7th. Netanyahu thought he could ignore the Palestinians and normalize with the Arab countries and just kind of push off this huge, problem of the Gaza Strip, of the West Bank, and expand more settlements in the West Bank, which, that was what the Trump administration supported, was a lot of settlement expansion. They declared that the Israeli settlements are not illegal, pretty big changes. So yeah, kind of, but, again, it's just hard to know what would have happened. I mean, there's no way to say that if Hamas was planning this attack and Trump was president, I mean, it's not going to stop Hamas. The situation with Russia and Ukraine, I mean, it's hard to imagine, again, how that would have gone with Trump. I think he might have been better at diplomacy when the lead up, the build up was happening. I think he was, unpredictable enough that he might have just been like, all right, NATO's off the table for Ukraine. I could have seen him doing something like that, but then they probably would have impeached him for that. Yeah, and I don't know how he would, because Trump was arguably, I mean, now with Biden, you can't really say this, I guess, one of the most pro-Israel presidents of all time. So I would assume that he would be giving Israel everything they want in this. and probably wouldn't be paying lip service to the idea of, humanitarian aid and stuff. But at the same time, it's hard to imagine anybody being worse than Biden right now. So
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think Trump was a little bit more of a diplomat than Biden, where Biden just seems to have zero interest in talking to anybody. And sometimes I almost think it's because like the I hate to say the platitude of like the people who handle him, but probably because they realize like he's probably not going to do that good when it comes to a face-to-face conversation. So it's probably best if we just kind of keep him off to the side and, kind of lampshade him to whatever he's going to do. What are your thoughts on Vivek dropping out and endorsing Trump? And what do you think of Vivek's campaign and some of the messaging that was coming out, specifically when it came to foreign policy? I know we touched on this a little bit last time, but just if you change your mind at all.
yeah, I mean, I stopped paying attention for the last like couple weeks or months or whatever. And Vivek, some things he would say I would really like, but then he would say the opposite thing when he would like it kind of depended on whoever he was talking to. At some point he said, "Oh, we don't need to defend Taiwan. We just need, semiconductor independence, and we can forget about them." And then the next day he's like, "No, we have to commit to defending Taiwan." And he, that was basically his position, was to end strategic ambiguity and say that we'll go to war with China
Strategic
over Taiwan.
clarity, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just, he says that in the name of preventing World War III, but that's how you get World War III. So I was just annoyed by kind of his lack of like consistency when it comes to foreign policy stuff. So, and then his whole thing with Ukraine and Russia, like he's like, "Oh, this is my plan to end the war in Ukraine. I'm going to get Putin to sever his military alliance with China," which first of all, they don't really have a formal military alliance. He would point to this friendship treaty that they signed. So he's basically asking them to give up all this trade. But Putin's not going to do that. It's just not a realistic plan that he had there. But he acted like it was, "Oh, nobody else is as smart as me when it comes to this issue," but he's really not that smart. And so that stuff just kind of annoyed me. I know he said a lot of good things, but I kind of just couldn't get past that stuff. And to me, his campaign just seemed like a PR campaign for himself. And now people are hopeful that he's going to push Trump, make Trump better on issues, but I don't know. I don't really have much hope for that. So I saw a clip recently where he was talking about January 6th back when it happened, and he said it like made him cry or something. So it showed, he was just a completely different person like a few years ago. So I just never like trusted him, but I know again that, he's good on Assange. He says pardon Assange on day one. He's saying he's going to, pressure Trump to do that. So, hopefully he has some good influence, but I just never really thought he was genuine. I don't know. Maybe I'm too like, and I don't feel like I'm being like a purist about him either. Because I can tolerate a lot of things from politicians, but there was just something about him that bugged me.
Yeah, fair
It's
enough.
the phoniness, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like we were talking about Rand Paul in the beginning, but Vivek has flip-flopped on a lot of issues. And the China and Mexico stuff in particular were like the two deal breakers for me. And I know a lot of people were swooning over him, but like just when he made it a point at one of the last debates to say like we need to declare strategic clarity with Taiwan to prevent World War III, I'm like, well, you realize like that almost guarantees World War III, just like you said. If you tell China that, hey, we're going to officially recognize Taiwan and we're going to guarantee their defense, like that is immediately guaranteed China goes for Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, people were trying to say he was like the anti-war candidate on the stage of that debate, but he also said he would go to war with China. Like,
yeah, I mean, he literally carried the establishment position. And
it was like a harder line than DeSantis took, I think.
Yeah, well, and like this is the funny part is that, and I'm sure you see this too, but this shit just drives me nuts when people talk about it. They're like, "Oh, what do you mean it's the establishment position to say that we'll defend Taiwan and go to war with China?" I'm like, are you like completely ignoring everything that Biden says and everything that he does? I understand you could probably ignore what he says, but if you look at what has been done over the last 3-4 years now, you can't say that he's been the Beijing Biden line, right? Where he's owned by China. Like, no, he's done everything he can to stick it right in their face and tell them like, look, you fuck around, you'll find out.
Yeah. Biden said it a few times. And now, so after this election in Taiwan, Biden came out and said, we don't support Taiwan independence. And China and the U.S. have been kind of talking a little more at like the military level lately. So hopefully there's some easing of tensions going on. But at the same time, the U.S. not, that's official U.S. policy on paper is that they don't support Taiwan independence. So he could have just been reiterating that after the election, and it might not really have meant that much. But hopefully, things are cooling down a bit between the U.S. and China. But yeah. So Vivek, I mean, I thought he would at least go through to New Hampshire.
I mean, he kind of did like an RFK style seppuku, is at least what I'm calling it. Basically, Trump had called him out and hurt his feelings once, and he just completely tanked his campaign from there. Kind of like when our RFK got called an anti-Semite, and then he just drove it right into the ground. So maybe we'll get your thoughts on RFK as well. I know Connor Freeman and I had we were singing his praises, and literally like the day after I put out the podcast, him and I just saying, man, it's so cool to see RFK, actually anti-war, saying good stuff about China and all this stuff. Literally the next day he says, oh, we have to defend Israel, and just did this whole Lakudnik celebration. It was very, very strange. So what's your thoughts on RFK and kind of how his campaign is shook out?
I mean, it's really incredible how bad he is on Israel. Like, it's not he's like as bad as, maybe even worse than like DeSantis and like Nikki Haley. Like, he's as bad as them. That's like, he's horrific on the issue. Did you see that interview he did on Breaking Points, where he said that the Palestinians were like the most pampered people in the history of the world?
I heard that line.
To foreign aid or whatever. Just kind of saying these most ridiculous claims about the situation, and deflecting in such like a pathetic, weaselly way. He was like, oh, well, did you know, because they asked him about the blockade on Gaza, and he's like, oh, did you know that we put a blockade on Iraq in the 1990s? It's like, and he said, so why do you only talk about it when the Jews do it? And it was Crystal Ball and what's his name?
Sagar and Jetty,
And they were both like, what? Like, that's bad too. Like, what are you talking about, man? Like that, it's immediately to imply that you're anti-Semitic. And it's just everything that he says he's against, everything that he says he claims that he's for when it comes to being like the peace candidate. It just all goes out the window when it comes to Israel. It's really incredible. It's really something.
Yeah, well, I remember he did a space, and this is kind of where Connor and I got really excited, is that he was saying, China's an economic competitor and we should win that competition. And then now my understanding is that he's basically saying China's going to blackmail the world. I'm like, how did you do like
has he been saying things like that?
I guess so. And I mean, I was mainly hopeful that we would have somebody up there to just say like, hey, why don't we stop this insanity with China? Because I know most of our main frustration is like, this is the most insane policy out of all of them, and it's the one that's being talked about the least. And to have RFK up there, at least at one point, saying that we shouldn't go to war with China, I mean, that's like, thank God at least somebody's saying it. But now that he's saying just crazy stuff about China, he sounds, almost identical to some of the boomer right wingers. It's just sad to see his campaign just take a total nosedive.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just haven't been paying attention to him lately. And it does seem like he's lost a lot of support because of this whole Israel-Gaza thing. I mean, the way things are looking, it looks like Trump is just going to blow everybody out of the water.
Yeah, well, okay, well, maybe one thing that will change your mind on that. What do you think? I know you and I are kind of on the same page when it comes to this, but I don't know if you're as certain as I am. Who do you think is his VP pick?
Well, I know we've talked about this, but I think it's the most Trump thing that he could do is pick Nikki Haley. Trump has always disappointed.
Yeah.
When you think he's going to do something good, he disappoints. And it does seem like a way he can kind of get back in the establishment's good graces, be like, all right, we're not going to try to, do a coup against you. If you pick Nikki Haley and you put these people in your cabinet, I could see him just saying, all right, because he doesn't care. He just wants to be back in. He just wants everybody to like him, and he wants to be on top again. That's really what this is all about. I mean, he did that interview with Tucker. There was one of the debates, and Tucker asked him about the CIA, and he's like, oh, there's a lot of good people in the CIA. And he's like, okay. And he asked about Jeffrey Epstein, and he's like, oh, yeah, he probably killed himself. Very sad. It's like, this is your deep state warrior. And it's like, and the vaccine COVID stuff, and he's still proud of that. And, I hope I'm wrong. Actually, so it does seem like there's a lot of pushback on that idea from within his campaign. So
Mhm.
hopefully that does something because,
Yeah.
but again, I won't be surprised. Do you agree that it's probably going to be Haley?
I would say I'm probably about 75% sure it's going to be Haley. Steve Bannon was a strategist for years, and Steve Bannon said he's picking a woman. And I think that the
Okay.
culture is so currently that you can't really afford to not have a woman on the ticket anymore, being that women are doing a lot of the voting now. So I think that he's going to want that graces. Carrie Lake is running to be, what is it, senator or congresswoman or something out in Arizona, and I think she's very unlikable. So I think if he picks her, that's suicide. I think if he picks Gnome, I think Gnome would be a good idea because she's attractive. She did well during the COVID lockdown, so that may balance out a
Mm.
little bit more of his negatives. But I think Nikki Haley being the second choice, and he hasn't really gone after her that much.
And
Um,
I mean, as far as I've seen, she hasn't really gone after him either. Like, I think
she I
she
think she
said
said
some stuff.
yeah, she said she wouldn't have him as VP, but everybody knows that she's not winning. I mean,
Yeah,
unless they
yeah.
really like, I think if they prop up Haley as the next president, then I think we all know that the game's game over. Let's go home. But I don't think that they're ready to do that. I really don't. I know people say that about 2020, but I don't think they would do that with Nikki Haley. I just think it would be taking the mask too far off.
Yeah, yeah. But if they could get her in some way.
Mhm.
It does sound like, from what I've heard, she has a much better shot in New Hampshire of doing better.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have any high hopes.
No, neither do I. I think it's going to be Trump and Haley 2024 versus Biden and Harris. I know everybody wants to say Newsom and Michelle Obama, but both of them have pretty much said, yeah, we're not running. And
Yeah, I
now
mean, at this point,
yeah,
they
go ahead.
haven't. It's still Biden. So
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard Bill O'Reilly saying that it's going to be Newsom or Michelle Obama. So I'm like, okay, if if Bill O'Reilly's saying it, we could probably count on it being bullshit. So, all right, Dave. Well, we've been going for about an hour now. You've been very gracious with your time. I think it's your fourth appearance on here, so
oh,
I
nice.
greatly appreciate everything you do. Um, you're a I don't want to say a hidden gem at this point because you've done quite a few rounds on some awesome shows. So hopefully, you get back up there again. Feel free to tell everybody where they can find you and support your work.
Yeah, all my writings at antiwar.com. You can follow me on Twitter at DeCamp Dave. You can listen to my show. It's a daily podcast and YouTube show called Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp, where I go over all the news stories that I write every day.
Cool, cool. All right. Well, no fun drivers or anything like that. I'm sure there's probably one coming up soon.
No, we finished one recently. We actually did really good, which was good because the last one was tough. So yeah,
Mhm.
we're good for now. But people could always support us at antiwar.com/donate if they want to help us out.
All right, hell yeah. Well, everybody make sure you go listen to Dave's stuff. That's why I've learned probably now a majority of stuff I know about foreign policy. And until next time, everybody take care.